Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Bible study. Hopefully, you're having a great day today. And today, we're going to wrap up our study of dealing with disappointment and how God can help us in times of disappointment. And I'm bringing Dave back on today, who's going to kind of continue our study and talk about what we talked about last week and give us some more insight to that. How are you today, Dave?
I'm wonderful, Jay. Thank you so much for asking.
Yeah. Hey, David, I wanted to kind of talk about dealing with disappointment and, the verses that we studied last week. And, I think the biggest thing that I learned from this study and hopefully that others learned is that we got to replace that disappointment with trust in God and get rid of the fear and anxiety and everything else that comes along with disappointments.
Yeah, that's correct, Jay. And as I thought about it, and as I listened to your podcast over those 5 days, it hits home because all of us go through moments of disappointment.
Hmm.
And I thought I'd start with just kind of looking at what are the most common forms of disappointment. You covered a few of them, but when I look at disappointment, it really breaks down to a couple areas for me. One, unmet expectations. Or in other words, we don't get what we hope for, or maybe even we work for. I mean, we might have put a lot of time into it, it just didn't come out right. I know I've done, projects here at home where I'm trying to build something, and then when I get to it, it just didn't work out right. One of
Yeah.
them was putting up a basketball. I was putting up a basketball hoop, and I thought I was following the instructions, and goodness, Jay, I messed up four different times, had to take it apart.
That's a
So talk
disappointment for
about
sure.
disappointment.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's expecting our partner or our friends to instinctively know what we need, or believing that love requires constant uh, high levels of performance, and if we
Mm,
don't meet it, man, we get disappointed.
yeah. Mm,
Like to give you some examples. For those of us who've had children, when our children don't do what we've taught them to do, it could cause disappointment, especially if our children go way off base and all of a sudden, they're you don't know what happened to them. And by the way, whether you're a Christian or not doesn't mean that your children are going to follow it, because each of us makes our own decision. And I've tried to tell people, when your kids get in trouble, sometimes you have to say, I'm not going to get you out of this jam.
mm,
You got to let them learn the lesson,
mm, yeah.
because if you
Yeah.
keep bailing them out, they'll never learn. And so we get disappointed, and or think about the times when our spouses have disappointed us. I know I've disappointed my spouse many times, and not intentionally. It just happens.
Mm.
And sometimes, again, it's what are your expectations? My son, who you guys have seen before, he's got a wonderful saying. He says, "Keep expectations low." That way they don't get
That's
disappointed.
right.
But it never really happens that way,
Yeah.
because we all instinctively have what we believe they should be doing. So
Hmm.
that's one way, unmet expectations. The other way is broken trust. Now, I think each of us in our relationships have broken trust of our partner, and that's when the people fail to act as we expected them to, uh, or really unpredictably do things that were bad. And what it causes as deep emotional disappointment, because somebody let you down and didn't fulfill what you wanted them to fulfill.
Mm.
So that's broken trust. And by the way, when once you someone loses trust in somebody, it takes a long time, if ever, to get that trust back.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another one is unrealistic hopes. So holding rigid or perfectionist. I don't know about you. My wife is a perfectionist. My
Mm.
son is a perfectionist. I'm only a perfectionist in one area, and that's music. But otherwise, it is what it is.
Yeah.
But it kind of, if no one meets up to your expectations, or even if you don't meet up to them, then you're kind of down. Because I know my wife's a wonderful artist, and she paints. She does oil. She does watercolor. She does everything, but she like never feels like she finished, because it never met the expectations
Mm.
that she set for herself, because they're kind of unrealistic. Of, man, I could do this. Now, if you've ever seen Picasso, I look at Picasso, I said, what was the guy thinking
Yeah.
when he would but maybe that was his
Hmm.
idea of what perfection was. But I
Sure.
bet he
Yeah.
ran the same thing. I think it was Van Gogh that cut off his ear because he just things weren't going well.
Yeah.
Another reason for disappointment is I like to call it arrival fallacy.
Mm.
What is arrival fallacy? It's believing a goal is going to bring you happiness. And then when you don't ever get there, when you get there and then you realize, man, I'm just not happy.
Yeah.
Like I remember when I first started my job, and I don't mind saying this, back in 1980, my first job, I made $12,600 that year. Now, what was my expectation? Man, if I could just make $20,000, all my problems will go away. And then if I could make 40,000 and on and on and on and on, and you find out every time you set that next level expectation, man, you don't ever get the joy or the expectation that you thought you would get.
Right.
In fact, I'll be honest with you, the more money I've made, the harder it is, and the harder the expectations, and the more that people are counting on you. So that's why I call arrival fallacy. Is if
Mm.
you think I could just, if I could just get here, I'm going to be much better off. And then when it doesn't happen, we're kind of disappointed.
Yeah.
Or how about this one? Self deception and impatience.
Mm. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
When when we deceive ourselves or we become impatient, and part of that might have to do with expectations. But man, if I rush a process, or if I have a bad self-image, it can lead to disappointment. Now, how
Mm.
many times have we said, as Christians, let's talk about being as Christians, we say, God, I promise never to do this again, and the next day you do it again.
Yeah. Yep.
It's interesting because I've heard pastors when in church during the altar call that they have people pray, and Lord, I promise to never, ever, ever, ever do this again. Why would you ever pray that? Because we're sinful creatures. Because you're going to sin again, and
Yeah.
then all of a sudden you're depressed,
When it
because
happens again. Yeah.
when it happens, oh man, but I
Yeah.
promised God that I wouldn't
Yeah.
do it, and here I went and did it. And then
Yep.
the last one is perfectionism, right? Is hey, none of us are perfect. And
Mm.
if we think we are, and we have this relentless focus on being perfect,
Mm.
we're always going to be dissatisfied because we will never achieve perfection here. So when we look at it, disappointment can impact our lives in a very negative way, and will often lead to depression and mistrust. So then how are we as Christians, how are we supposed to handle this? How are we supposed to deal with that depression that we could get many times often self-inflicted?
Mm.
So so the way I look at it, and you kind of discussed it on Monday, was Philippians 4, 6, and 7, where you rightly stated, Jay, that the verse tells us about prayer, petition, and thanksgiving, which are wonderful things. And these verses encourage us to surrender our worries to God, right? The peace of God out of that
Mhm.
verse
Mhm.
that acts as a sentinel. And if nobody knows what a sentinel is, that's the guard that stands in front of an entryway. So that he's
Yeah.
the sentinel to guard our hearts and minds in Christ. And this divine peace surpasses human understanding, again, going back to the verse, and provides stability when we have trials. And this brings us back to what we talked about a couple of weeks ago about the armor of God. If we don't put on that armor of God, we don't have the shield and the helmet and the breastplate to protect us from these things, inclusive of depression, because then we let the arrows of the enemy or ourselves come and
Mm.
inflict us, and
Yeah.
and then we're depressed. So it takes discipline to follow this model. That's why when we went back to the armor of God, it says put on the armor of God. And it's a daily thing, it's a continual thing.
Yeah.
It doesn't just happen once. You have to do it every day the moment you wake up. Now, there's a saying that it says, in order for something to become a habit, it takes 60 times prior to it becoming a habit. That means the first 59 times we have to actively force ourselves and push ourselves to pray, to petition, and to give thanks before it becomes a habit. And until it becomes a habit, you can't do those things. And so that's why you have to force yourself. So you might say, well, how can I give thanks for something that disappointed me? Well, let me tell you a little story. Back in the early 90s, I was working for a company and I traveled a lot. And I had a trip that I was going to go to Indianapolis from Chicago. It's a small little plane that you take. And I was supposed to go, I believe I was supposed to go on Tuesday. And the customer called on Monday, says, "Hey, can we push it from Tuesday to Wednesday?" And of course, you have to be gracious. Yeah, absolutely, I could do that for you. Well, when I got off the phone, I was really disappointed because it messed up my schedule. In fact, I was angry.
Mm.
I said, "Man, this has totally upset my whole thing of what I'm going to do." Well, what happened? So I wound up moving the meeting. Actually, I lied. The meeting was Wednesday, and they wanted it on Tuesday, so I had it backwards. So I went to the meeting on Tuesday, had a great meeting, came home. I said, "Well, that was good." Now, back then, my mom was still alive, and she was the type that she wanted to pray for you every day. So I would always let her know what my travel schedule was. And she said, "Call me before you leave, and I'll pray for you. Call me when you land, and I'll pray for you that you arrive safely." So I had told my mom, "Hey, I'm going to be leaving Wednesday. I'm going to go to this meeting, and then I'm going to come back the same day." So I went to the meeting, fine. So Wednesday comes. Now I'm at home because I was working remote that day. Wednesday afternoon, my mom calls up my wife and says, "Honey, did you hear what happened?" She goes, "What are you talking about, Mom?" The plane that I was supposed to be on wound up in a cornfield in Indiana, no survivors.
Wow. Wow.
Let me tell you something. As disappointed I was on Monday when I had to change my plans, I was thankful on Wednesday
Yeah.
that I
I
wasn't
bet.
on that flight
I
and that
bet.
God was watching over me.
Mm.
So, how do you translate that into, well, I need to give Thanksgiving when I'm depressed, not afterwards? Because I kind of did it backwards. I got depressed and angry and didn't give thanks until I saw that God was actually watching over me and protecting me.
Yeah.
And that's when we get that, so the command that we have in verse 6, do not be anxious about anything. As anxious as I was and as upset as I was, I did not allow the peace of God that surpasses all understanding to give me peace and allow me to be thankful for something that I had no control over.
Yeah.
So, as Paul commands, we need to release from worry, but we don't have to deny that there's trouble. It really warns us against letting anxiety overwhelm us and paralyze us. Anxious implies that we're being pulled in different directions, while the alternative is focusing on God. When my flight plans changed, I focused on all the things that had messed up and not focused on, God, I gave you my life. I'm turning this over to you, and I just need to be grateful and be at peace with your decision.
Yeah, sometimes
Boy, that was
we don't see God's plans, and we're not thankful for the plans right away until we learn later on that it was a better plan to begin with. Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
And so that's how I learned to be thankful no matter what. Now, am I perfect at it? No.
yeah,
Because it depends on how bad it was. And then you have to get back to the discipline. Force yourself. Say the verses. Be thankful in all things, right? Philippians 4:4. Rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. So those are the things we have to subconsciously and consciously do in order to get back in the habit, especially if it's something that hits us really hard. Because it's
mhm,
so easy to get into a depressed state when things don't go our way.
yeah,
So the action again in verse 6, but in every situation by prayer, petition, and thanksgiving, present your request to God. So prayer and petition, that suggests comprehensive prayer. It doesn't mean, hey, just give a general prayer. We teach our kids, and maybe wrongfully so, I don't know, when they go to bed, you say, okay, kids, we're going to say the prayer, Lord, I lay me down to rest, blah, blah, blah. You know
mhm,
the thing.
yeah,
And we're teaching them to recite something that is normal. What we should be teaching our kids and ourselves is prayer is nothing but talking to God with what you have in your heart. It's not a memorized saying that you're going to do, because then it takes no effort to do it other than the memorization. So our general devotion and specific request have to go to God in a real sense. A lot of people think there are people that pray amazingly because they use huge words or they pray forever.
yeah,
You know what God's really impressed with? Tell me
mm,
what's on your heart.
yeah, exactly.
I don't need, right? I don't need the flowery words. So just really tell me what's on your heart, and I'll deal with it. And then when you're telling him, you do it with a sense of gratitude, recognizing that God's faithfulness and sovereign is sovereign even before the answer comes. So if we know He's going to win and we're going to have peace in it, then let's just have confidence in Him to do that in every situation. Because there's no burden that's too small to bring to God, and there's no burden too big to bring to God.
Right.
Because if it concerns you, it concerns Him.
Yeah. You
And
know,
this,
I think Paul, when he was writing this, I think he derived a lot of what he was trying to say from the Old Testament, especially from Isaiah, who, kind of, he's the one who taught us about that, about, that we can't understand the things that we have to seek his guidance over our human reasoning, because the first thing we'll do is blame God, or
yeah,
and not seek his wisdom in these situations. And I think about that in Isaiah 55:9, like we covered this week. And it tells us that God's wisdom is far more than we could ever understand. And I think that's where
absolutely.
Paul, knowing the scriptures, the Old Testament, knew that.
Yeah, and I want you to think about another Old Testament example. Think about Gideon,
Mm,
right? He
yeah.
had what, 30,000 plus men to go fight a battle, and God said, "No, I don't need that many." We went from 30,000 down to 300. Now, here's the thing: you think Gideon was disappointed when God said, "Hey, see how many are scared?" And I think it was 10,000 that said, "Yeah, we're gone. Bye bye."
Yeah.
Now you're disappointed because, hey, what we talked about earlier, somebody didn't meet your expectations.
Mm,
Now, honestly, when I look at the thing of Gideon, I know he was disappointed, but I think that the thing that really impacts me that I have to be careful of is, you remember when Jesus was tempted by Satan? He says, you shall not tempt the Lord your God.
right.
Well, what did Gideon do twice? He tempted, he said, God, if this is what you really want me to do, have the skin be wet,
Yeah.
or have it dry while the ground is wet.
Hmm.
Well, that wasn't good enough, because then he says, "Okay, God, I got to really test you again. This time, make
Make the
it's the
skin wet.
opposite way. Make
Yeah.
the skin
Yeah.
wet and the ground dry." I'm going, "Wow, Gideon. I mean, you're really testing God here to prove His point." So he was disappointed. This is why he did these things. But look at what happened.
Yeah.
From 30,000 down to 300, they didn't even. Do you remember the instruments of war they used?
The sword.
A flame, all
Oh,
right, a torch,
yeah. Torch.
a glass, and a horn.
Mm,
That's it.
yeah.
And with that alone, with 300 men, God won the victory, and He actually made them kill themselves because
Yeah.
He made them afraid.
That's right. That's right.
So, in every situation, turn it over to God, however it's small or however big it is, God can answer it. And
Yeah.
and then remember the promise, which is also that verse 7. It says, "And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds." So, what's the result? The immediate consequence of a surrendered prayer, is peace. So when we actually pray what's in our heart and we believe, God will give us peace.
Yeah. And, I think about Psalm 35 that we covered this week about, if we do that and do it as soon as you can, that your disappointment will go away. If you pray as soon
Yeah.
as you can, that your weeping may endure for the night, but, joy comes in the morning. So, as soon as we're disappointed, don't linger on it for weeks or whatever. Right then and there, immediately, God, I'm disappointed, but I trust in you, and go ahead and get it out there and let God deal with it, and let that peace protect our hearts as soon as we can.
Yeah, you hit it spot on, Jay, because that whole part about the transcends all understanding.
Mm,
Peace is supernatural from God.
mhm.
It doesn't make any sense based on the circumstances. But that's what God provides, because it will guard us. But when it says "will guard" in that verse, that was actually a military term that
Mm,
you use for a sentinel or a guardian, implying God's uh, peace protects emotions, it protects our hearts, it protects our thoughts and our minds from fear and doubt. But again, we've got to turn it over to him. That's why we have to continually do it until it becomes habit. And then we have to have trust over worry. So we have to move from self reliance that I could fix the problem to God reliant that God is in control.
Mm.
And that means, again, active surrender. When you pray, are you actively surrendering your burdens to God? Or do you want to hold on to them because they're emotionally, it's part of the things you want to hold on to emotionally. You've got to surrender them to God so that He can protect you. Because peace isn't just a feeling, peace is a defensive mechanism and a protective agent to the believer. So when we have peace, we've got our shield on, we've got our breastplate on, we've got our helmet on, and nothing can penetrate. But you got to do it because Jesus teaches that excessive stress and worry are counterproductive, and they actually arise from a lack of trusting in God's provision.
Yeah.
So instead of worrying, he advises us to prioritize God's kingdom, trusting in Him daily for our sustenance and finding rest in Him, and emphasizing that life is more than material needs. So stop worrying about those needs. Matthew chapter 6, 25 to 34 is all about that,
Hmm.
where Jesus commands not to be anxious about food, life, clothing, because God cares for His children more than the birds or flowers. So why do we worry? Why do we get disappointed when I couldn't get that new outfit, or I couldn't get that new car, or I didn't get that promotion? Hey, God's got in store for you what is even better than that, and worrying is futile. That's what Matthew 6:27 says. Which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? Nobody. God already has designated the amount of days that you're going to live. Worrying about something will not increase it. All it'll do is it'll make you more miserable.
Yeah.
So focus on today, right? That's why Jesus said in verse 34 of Matthew 6, do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble. You start worrying about stuff that's out in the future, you're wasting your time because that's still going to happen. All you did was augment it by tossing more stuff on top of you, and now you're really disappointed and you become depressed. And then in that same verses in 623, the remedy for stress is to seek God's kingdom first,
Hmm.
trusting that the practical needs will be met by what His kingdom brings. So we find rest in Him. That's why He says, "As easy as my yoke." Right.
Right.
So this is how we kind of deal with that. And you talked about Jeremiah 29:11, which declares God's plan for His people for welfare, peace, and hopeful future, not destruction. And again, this really dealt with, and you covered this really well. That it was the 7 year captivity that was coming to the end. It was about the Babylonian exile. Uh, he was talking about prospering you, about versus immediate comfort. Sometimes we get depressed because we don't get that immediate feedback. And unfortunately, in today's society, we've become a society that we want immediate, right? I want to have it immediately. Why is Amazon so successful? Because you
Mm.
could order almost anything you want and have it delivered same day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Immediate gratification.
Hmm.
And we kind of approach life the same way. I want everything immediately gratified. And when I don't get it immediately gratified, I get disappointed. Instead of looking at a future and a hope, and that's where we should be because, hey, folks, our hope and our joy is not here on this earth. This is why God, Paul said, for me to live as Christ, to die as gain, because our hope is that someday we'll be with Christ for all eternity, and all this stuff, all this pain, all these sorrows will
Yeah.
disappear.
Let's move into that. And I want to go to this verse here, 2 Corinthians 4:17, where it says, "For our light and momentary troubles are are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all."
Yeah. What does that mean? Well, let's look at context of suffering.
Mm.
Uh, Paul wrote this verse while he was facing intense trials, including persecution,
Yeah.
distress, and physical danger. So calling this light suggests a perspective shift, not a denial of pain. So we're gonna suffer, we're gonna have pain, but we need to change our focus on the hope that we have, which is in Jesus Christ. Light and momentary. What does that mean? So compared to eternity, the the longest life of suffering is just a fleeting moment because it's the light that we have about the future that makes it all bearable by the grace of God. Every one of the disciples suffered greatly.
Yeah.
I don't know a lot of your folks. 11 out of the 12 were martyred. The only one that didn't get martyred was John.
Hmm.
But listen to this: when John wrote the book of Revelation, he was in his 90s.
Yeah.
He was sent to the Patmos Island as a prisoner, and you know what they did on the Patmos Island? They
Mm.
broke rocks.
Mm.
They didn't even feed them.
And they
So
lived
here
in
he was,
caves.
and here he is on Patmos breaking rocks like you've seen in a lot of movies, and they had to fend for their own food, so they had to find their own food.
Yeah.
And yet he was in peace and content in the life that God promised and wrote the most wonderful. And I know a lot of people are so afraid to read the book of Revelation, but it really is the culmination of God's grace to us when we see what God will do, that what he promised from Genesis chapter 3:15 all the way until we get to Revelation when he finally destroys evil, and for those who've put their trust in him will give everlasting life, peace, joy, contentment, and his fellowship for all eternity.
Mm.
And in Revelation, it says when we have the new heaven and the new earth and the new Jerusalem, there's not even a sun to illuminate it because the illumination comes from God Himself.
Yeah.
So we,
Yeah.
we, we think about these things and hear all these. I mean, it's said that when Peter was crucified on the cross, he said, I'm not worthy to be crucified like my Lord was crucified, so crucify me upside down,
Mm.
because he wasn't so concerned with what was happening here because it was light and momentary
Yeah.
compared to the glory that we're going to receive. And that glory, right, that refers to the splendor, substance, and value of a future heavenly state.
Yeah.
And that's incredible.
And I think, the title of this study was dealing with disappointment. And I think that is the best way that we deal with disappointment is that contrast between the light and momentary afflictions right here and the eternity and the glory that we're going to receive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it takes active preparation.
Yeah.
So the suffering itself is producing or working for the believer for the future state of eternal glory. Trials cultivate faith. Think about it. Every time you went through a trial and you saw God's hand, what it produced in you was the faith that the Holy Spirit gives you, knowing that, man, my God doesn't fail.
Mm.
And it builds character
Mm.
and it builds patience. And it really provides an unseen perspective of what is to come. Because honestly, Jay, even though the Bible in many places like Revelation describe what heaven is going to look like, I can't really perceive it.
Yeah.
It's just so far out there. I don't understand. And yet, God, in His just divine blessing to us, He allows those things to build that character in us and to allow us to depend more and more on Him when we're disappointed. Because what He's now think about it this way: we get disappointed in ourselves, we get disappointed in our family, we get disappointed in our friends, we get disappointed in our church, we get disappointed in the government, right? And all that does is it puts us on our back feet and never really moving forward in actively pursuing Christ. The alternative is turn it over to God and allow Him to give you some hope that you would have never had in the first place,
Yeah.
and move you beyond worrying about the present and worrying and being more excited about the future. Because And by the way, it's not just about the future, it's also what he does for us here, because again, he gives us that peace that surpasses all understanding. He
Yeah.
prospers us in ways that expand our understanding of prosperity. Now, there are, we call the prosperity preachers who talk about, hey, God wanted you to be rich. God wanted you to never be sick. That's all a lie, folks. That's not, don't believe it. Third John 2 really tells us to pray for prosperity in all things about health, but it's about soul health. It's not about physical health. It's about you need to be healthy spiritually. That's what it was talking about. Proverbs 38 advises us to neither seek poverty nor riches, but only my daily bread. That is wealth. Would we trust in God for our daily wealth?
Mm.
So the thing is, even when you talk about Isaiah chapter 43 this week, it encourages us to let go of the past and the former triumphs and embrace the new things that God is bringing. And that's where we get, so we've got to move forward. We have to have divine intervention. We have to have hope in trials. Isaiah chapter 41 is all about that, right?
Mm.
It's about the poor and needy search for water, but there isn't any. Why? Because the water we're searching for is only found in Christ. And so,
Yeah.
as we continue to look at those things, let's not get depressed or disappointed about things that are earthly, but let's be more joyous about the things that are spiritual.
Yeah.
Because Jesus likened the gifts of his spirit to living water. That's why he said in John chapter 7, let anyone who is thirsty come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as scripture has said, rivers of living water will flow from within them. Man, now that's a hope. Now we can have confidence. And by the way, it gives us the opportunity to experience that here on earth. And I want to share one more tale before we conclude today is I think most people know the actor Tim Allen. He played the Santa Claus in the Santa
Mm-hmm.
Claus movie.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Tim Allen was not a good person. I mean, he had a lot of problems, but his problems all stemmed from the fact that his father had been murdered when he was a
Hmm.
child.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
And he could not forgive that man. So he lived with this unforgiveness. And by the way, unforgiveness is a cancer that causes all kinds of problems in us. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So when Charlie Kirk was murdered and Erica Kirk at the big event that they held to honor Charlie Kirk, and she got up there and she said about her husband's assassin, I forgive you.
Yeah.
Tim Allen has gone on the record to say that he was absolutely floored by that. And he said, how could you forgive the man that just assassinated your husband?
Mm.
And it made him reflect. And in that understanding of what God can do, even in terrible moments of disappointment,
Yeah.
he realized that he needed to turn over that unforgiveness to God so that he could find freedom. And so, after I think it was 3 decades or more, he finally forgave the man that killed his father and it set him free.
Mm.
So instead of living in disappointment for years and years and years, all of a sudden he found a new freedom and understanding that God's ways are better than our ways. So, my beloved, as you look at the things that are causing you to be disappointed from whatever the course or whatever the source, know that God has a better plan for you than it's even in the circumstances that are surrounding you. God wants to encourage you. He wants you to be able to endure hardships. He wants to give you hope, knowing that God is in control, and these temporary trials, afflictions, and disappointments that we have will lead to everlasting glory and rewards.
That's right.
So if you find yourself disappointed, turn it over in prayer to God, asking Him to relieve your disappointment and thank Him for the issue that brought
Mm.
disappointment.
Mm.
And this you'll find peace if you're sincere and choose to let go of the disappointment. So I think it was a marvelous topic you talked about this week, Jay, and
Yeah.
I know all of us suffer from it. And I'm just so thankful that we have a God that cares and that will see us through every disappointment that we have.
Yeah. Well said, Dave. Thanks for today. And let's look forward to next week. We're going to be talking about who we are in Christ, and I'm looking forward to that. Have a great day, Dave.
Thank you, Jade. Have a
Bye
wonderful day.
bye.